Welcome back to Milan Recording Studios. My name is James Pavel Shakras, and today I have a follow-up video to a video that I did previously on my channel, which was where I repaired this reed organ. Now, I don't know that the repair actually worked. I repaired it last night. I played it a teeny tiny bit a couple hours after I repaired it because it didn't say how long the glue took to cure. So I played it a tiny bit and it made some noise, so I think it's going to work, but in this video we're going to see how well it works. Is it going to work as well as a full bellows restoration? Well, of course it isn't going to. What we used was some cotton cloth and some rubber cement to patch up a giant tear in the bellows and to help keep some of the air inside. So is that going to work as well as a full bellows restoration? No. But it only cost $35, and that included an extra repair that was kind of unnecessary, where I replaced the straps underneath here to the pedals, which of course is helping it work a little bit better. So I'm going to play this organ a little bit and see how well the repair works. I have no idea. It might just fall apart on camera, and I won't be able to play the organ for the rest of the video, but I'm going to try to play some pieces on this little Moline Reed organ that I have in the studio, and we're going to see what happens. Now, the reason that I have this reed organ, there's a few reasons for it, actually. One of them is I just kind of like reed organs. I think there's something cool about them. The way they sound is really unique. They have kind of like an old sound, but also just kind of a cool sound. I don't know what it is about them. I just think that they're kind of neat. And there's also a couple other reasons that we have this reed organ in particular. First of all, it's small, as you can see. It's only this tall. It's a pretty compact little guy. So many reed organs will have a really tall ornamental top. Some reed organs will even have actual pipes that make sound up there as well. That's kind of rare, but some of them will. Others will have ornamental pipes or just decorations. My grandma has a really, really big one that's a Story and Clark model, and it's probably like 5 or 6 feet tall, and it's got this really beautiful ornamental top, but we don't really have the space for that here in the studio, so this little guy is kind of the perfect size because it's really small and it's also very easy to move around. Another thing that we liked is that we actually knew the full history of this organ's past. We knew how many owners it had and all that stuff, which was absolutely fantastic. It started off its life in a small town in Illinois where it was used as a church organ, which is kind of neat, and then after some years, we don't really know how long it spent at that church, but after some time it was actually moved out of the church and into someone's home, and they were a church organist, and they used this as a practice instrument at home to practice music at home before playing it on the big the big organ in the church. So they had it for some time, and then after a while, in 1964, it made its way out to California, where a guy repaired it, kind of like we repaired it. He put some tape on the bellows and also made some other small modifications to help it work better, and that was all done in 1964, and those repairs lasted about 50 years, and that's when we bought it. We bought it just a few months ago, and we brought it here to the studio, but once we got it here, we realized that there was a giant tear under the bellows, and so we had to make that repair, like I said earlier. So now we're going to see if it works. So let's see how well this organ works after we made a repair to it. So now for the moment of truth, how well does the Moline organ work now that we've made the repair? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play 3 or so songs on the instrument. The first one I'm going to play is the Davy Jones theme from Pirates of the Caribbean. It's one of my favorite pieces to play on really most any instrument. It sounds amazing, but it really works well on the reed organ. So the stops I'm using, in case you're curious, are the diapason, the viola, the flute, and the dulcet, and I'm also going to be using a couple of other features that you can't see down here. There's 2 knee levers, which are quite common on these old reed organs. The one on the right here, often you'll see these broken, but these 2 actually work, which is awesome. The one on the right here controls the forte stop, which makes everything just a little bit louder, and the one on the left opens up all of the stops on the instrument and makes it sound super cool. So I'm going to be using both of those here in the piece, and hopefully you guys enjoy. Also, this C up top here is being kind of stubborn, so hopefully that doesn't stick down. I'll take a look at that later and see if I can oil it or something and make it work a little bit better, but hopefully that doesn't stick in the performance. So that is the sound of the Moline Reed organ, and I'm so happy that it works. I can now play the instrument. Is it as good as having the bellows completely recovered? Probably not, because I've heard that when you hold a note on a reed organ with one stop pulled out, the sound is supposed to last for several seconds after you stop pumping, and this one doesn't quite do that. But I think for a $35 repair, the fact that I can now get the organ to play and make some beautiful music, I think is totally awesome. Like I said, at some point I'll probably get it restored, but for now, I'm very happy that I can get it to play songs. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to play some Bach music on it. I don't think I'm going to need these knee levers anymore, so I'm going to put those away. Instead, I'll just pull out the forte stop. Let's try the orchestral stop. Let's try the violoncello stop, and why not the bass coupler? So let's play. I have no idea how that'll sound, by the way. I like to. It takes some time to kind of get registrations to sound really cool on here, and this one might not sound cool, so no guarantees here. But let's play the Bach piece that I always play in my piano reviews on this reed organ here. It's called "We Pray Now to the Holy Spirit." It's a kind of an obscure Bach chorale, but everyone seems to enjoy it, so hopefully you guys enjoy it here on the Moline Reed organ. So that was that Bach piece, but now let me play another Bach piece, which is a new one that I've recently learned to add into my repertoire when I review an instrument. This one came from this cute little Bach chorale book that I'll put on the cute little reed organ. I think it's a good match. This is an old book too. It's like from 1920, so it's not quite period correct, but it's close. I think I'll just use that same stop setup because that sounded alright for the other Bach piece. So here we go. This is a piece called "Deck Thyself, My Soul, with Gladness." I don't think that's the original title, but that's what it's called in this book. That piece is a bit tricky to play. Those tenths are kind of tricky to get to, and then the stops are kind of in your way, so there are a couple little funny notes in there, but the piece is a little bit more challenging to play, especially on a reed organ. I'm not used to how it feels under my fingers on the piano. It feels a lot different than the reed organ. If you ever played one of these, you'll know what I'm talking about. The action feels very springy. There's not really any weight to it, and it's a lot different from a piano action, so there's a bit of adjustment time that you need to kind of get used to the way one of these feels. But playing those two Bach pieces on it was kind of a cool idea because, like I said, this organ started off its life in a church, and it probably played music a lot like that. They were probably Bach chorales or some sort of religious music like that. So I think those pieces worked very, very well on this organ. Again, I could probably tweak the stops and make it sound a little bit better, but that is how this organ sounds, and hopefully you enjoyed it. But now let me show you guys what all of these stops do. So maybe we'll move the camera around, maybe get a better view of what the stops look like, and then I will take you on a tour of what all of them do and give you an idea of what each stop sounds like on its own. So here's a bit of a different view of the stops. Unfortunately, you can't read what's on them, but I will tell you what is on all the stops. So I'll go from left to right, and I'll play each one by itself and just give you a little bit of idea of what each stop sounds like by itself, just in case you're curious. I did this once before on a video before I played the organ, and everyone got upset, so now I'm going to be doing it afterwards, just in case you wanted to see this anyway. You can watch it, but if you didn't want to and just hear the organ play, then you can do that already. So basically, the first stop all the way off to the left is a bass coupler, and what this does is it couples the bass half of the organ. So when you play a note up here, as you can see, this one goes down as well. There's a little mechanism underneath the keys here. I took a look at it because I was curious how it worked, and when you move this, it just kind of moves a little mechanism up underneath the keys. So when you push this key down, it's also activating the one an octave lower. It's kind of cool. It does change the feel of the instrument a little bit because you are pushing two notes down with one finger instead of one, but that is what the bass coupler does, and that is how it works. It's about a little over an octave, so from this E down to this F, and everything else in between has a bass coupler on it. Now, the diapason sound is basically kind of like the default sound. It's kind of the first sound that you'd play when you play the organ. I believe that's kind of what the diapason is. You find diapason stops on pipe organs as well, and this is what they're calling the diapason on here. I believe the diapason is just kind of like a generic sound that you kind of build everything else around. You don't have to. I often find myself not doing that, but that is one way that you can kind of start creating sound on an organ, is start off with the diapason and go from there. That's how I kind of understand it. So this is the sound of the diapason. I'm just going to play some generic chords and just let you guys see how it sounds. I'll also pull the forte stop out so it's louder. So that is the sound of the diapason stop. I'm just going to play a few individual notes here. And it goes all the way down to that low F. Now, the diapason stop is a bass-only stop, and many of these on this half of the instrument are. So if I go up here, you'll find, maybe not with the diapason, I'm wrong about the diapason, but some of these are bass-only stops. Maybe the echo horn? Maybe not with the echo horn either. The echo horn is kind of like, it's part of the diapason. If you pull the diapason out and then pull the echo horn in and out, you won't hear any sound difference at all. But if you put the diapason in and leave the echo horn out, it's still making sound. Because the echo horn and the diapason are coupled, and they're kind of like the same exact sound, and I'm not exactly sure what the difference is, but the echo horn is its own stop. It seems to be connected with the diapason inside mechanically. I took a look at that. But the echo horn also has its own sound, but it's coupled with the diapason. Now, the viola sound, I think this is a bass-only stop. I don't think it goes all the way up here. Am I wrong? I must have... I could have sworn that some of these were only bass-only stops. Maybe it was broken before and now it's working properly. That must have been what's happening. Perhaps part of it wasn't connecting right. Because I remember before, when I was at the previous owner's house, I was playing these, and this half of the instrument would only work like this far into the bass, and then this half of it, these stops would only work so far into the treble, and I'll have to take a look at those, but it seems that I'm wrong about these being bass-only stops. I know the sub bass is a bass-only stop, but these ones also seem to be... These also seem to go up into the treble as well. So that's kind of interesting. So this is the viola stop. It has a different sound slightly than the diapason. And kind of interesting, you can see that it kind of like doubles back on itself, and you've got higher pitches down here as well. So it's a very interesting sound, and I assume that the viola name is supposed to say that, hey, if you have a bit of an imagination, you can imagine that sounding sort of like a viola. Now, the sub-bass stop is my personal favorite, and I love how this one sounds. The sub-bass name is kind of self-explanatory. It's really, really low bass tones. Now, this one I know is a bass-only stop. It's only one octave from this C, and I think it includes this C as well. Let's start up here. Yep, and then this is a low pitch already. If you play this D, nothing happens because you only have an octave of sub-bass. But if I start here and keep going down, you'll hear how awesome this sounds. I pulled in some other stops just to give you an idea of the context of the sub bass. I used it in the Davy Jones piece, and it is awesome, and it's one of my favorite stops on the whole organ. There's also one here called Violoncello, and I assume that's supposed to sound kind of like a cello if you have a bit of an imagination. So here is the sound of the Violoncello Stop. It's kind of like the viola, but I think it's ever so slightly different. I'm not exactly sure, but... That's the viola, this is the violoncello. I think they're different, I'm not sure, but we do have two stops. One says viola, one says violoncello, and I think that they're ever so slightly different. The baritone stop here has this type of a sound. Now, all these stops do kind of sound a bit the same, but that's because the sound is being generated by reeds. Of course, there's nothing electronic. These aren't any kind of a sound sample, of course. These are all being created by metal reeds, so metal reeds will kind of have a similar sound, but they are sort of designed to have a separate sound. And if you looked at the inside, you would see that many of these, some of these are coupled together, so perhaps baritone and violoncello, or vice versa. In fact, I think baritone and violoncello are coupled, because when I pull out violoncello, the baritone stop gets very light because it's not connected to anything. So I think these two are connected together, so that is also why they might sound the same, because this one is just playing part of this, or vice versa. But that's the sound of the baritone. That's what we have there. Now the forte stop, which I pulled out for everything, is basically exactly that. It's forte. So if I push this in, and let's play a different chord here. Let's play, like, I don't know, B flat minor or something. That's B flat augmented. And that's B flat major. Okay, so if we play some B flat major here, and then pull out the stop, hear that? It gets louder. Because that is what the forte does. It makes everything louder. So if you want to be playing quietly, you can have the forte stop pulled in, and if you want it to be louder, you can pull it out, and it gives a little bit more detail to the sound. And that's why I decided to have it pulled out for all of these, just because it makes everything a little bit louder and sound a bit nicer. Now the Vox Humana stop does not appear to be working at the moment, but basically what this does is when you pull it out, it activates a cardboard vane on the inside of the instrument that gets blown with wind from the generation of the pump. When you pump the pedals, it creates wind, and it blows over the Vox Humana mechanism and makes these cardboard vanes on the inside spin. And if you know how like a vibraphone works, that's kind of the same technique going on here. On a vibraphone, in the resonator tubes, you have these little discs that will spin, and they'll open and close the resonator tube. On here, you have this cardboard vane that kind of opens and closes a big slot on the inside of the organ that, as it's spinning, lets sound out and then closes it back up. So kind of like the forte stop, but a little bit different. So when that's spinning, it kind of gives the organ a louder and softer sound, which I suppose by the name of the stop, Vox Humana, which would mean human voice, is supposed to sort of sound like a human voice, I guess. But the Vox Humana stop on here, unfortunately, isn't working, but when it does work, it sounds really cool. I had a video a while back of a Mason and Hamlin Reed organ, and the Vox Humana stop, I think on that one they called it tremulant, was working properly, and it sounded absolutely awesome. So hopefully we'll get that fixed at some point. The clarionet stop and the next three stops are all chained together. If you pull out the clarionet and the flute sound, they sound just like the orchestral. But basically, the clarionet here is this one, and I thought this one was a treble only, but yeah, see, this one here is a treble only. How far down does it go? Down to this F. So from this F up, you have the clarionet sound. And that sounds kind of cool, and if you have a bit of an imagination, it almost kind of sounds like a woodwind instrument, like a clarinet or a saxophone, and I assume that name, clarionet, would mean this stop is just supposed to sound like a clarinet, which it sort of kind of does, actually, which is kind of neat. Now, the orchestral stop, like I said, is the same as the clarionet and the flute stop being pulled out, but this is what that sounds like. And again, this one doesn't go down here, it only goes down to the low F. Now, if I pull out the flute sound, you'll hear that it's a really, really high-pitched sound. And again, this one only goes down to the F, it doesn't go down below, but you've got really high-pitched tones up here. And if you pull out the clarionet stop and the flute stop, it sounds exactly like the orchestral. Because what the orchestral mechanism does inside is it takes the clarinet little mechanism and the flute mechanism and makes them go together to give you kind of what I guess is supposed to sound like a full orchestra with flutes and reed woodwind instruments, but that is what the orchestral stop does. Now the Celeste Stop is kind of interesting. What this one does is it makes a slightly out-of-tune sound, so it's playing two reed banks, one of which is completely unique to the Celeste sound, and basically it makes it sound, I suppose, heavenly. The name Celeste is French and it means heavenly, so this is what the Celeste sounds like. And as you can hear, it sounds a little bit out of tune there. But that's intentional because that is what the Celeste sound is supposed to do. It's supposed to give you kind of like a little bit of an ever so slightly dissonance, and it just kind of adds a little bit more fullness to the sound. Let's just pull out a bunch of other sounds here and just hear what it sounds like together. And if you pull that in, and then pull that back out again, it makes it sound a lot more full, and that is the sound of the Celeste. It's kind of like a little out-of-tune sound. Now the dulcet stop is one that we believe we have fixed. It wasn't working before, but I think we have it working now, and I think that it's paired with the Melodia, and it's a similar situation to over here with diapason and echo horn. When you pull echo horn out, it has its own sound, but when you pull diapason out, echo horn does nothing. It's a similar situation over here with the dulcet. When you pull the Melodia out, the dulcet does nothing, but when you pull the dulcet out by itself, it has its own sound. At least I think it does. Hopefully it's working. It is working. Check that out. And again, this is a treble-only stop. It doesn't go below this low F. Now the Melodious Stop probably sounds very similar to it. As you can hear, it does. But so I'm not exactly sure what the difference between the dulcet and the Melodia is. They do kind of move the same mechanism, but each stop does create sound when you pull it out, so I assume that that's working as intended. Now the treble coupler up here works just like the bass coupler. What happens is when you push a note up here in the treble, it also activates a note higher up on the keyboard, and it probably works a lot like the, how far down does this go? It goes all the way down to this F, and then probably would go all the way up to this F because that's the highest note that has an octave above it, so that one doesn't have an octave, of course. But everything else in here has a treble coupler, which I believe is working. It doesn't look like it's moving the note down very far, but if you play, say this. Yep. Hear that? That one, I guess, isn't working, but the treble coupler activates the note an octave above the note that you're playing here to kind of give it a more full sound. Now I mentioned that there are two knee levers down here, which you might not be able to see, but there are two knee levers right down here. So let me show you guys what those look like, and I'll briefly explain what they do because they're kind of cool. So these here are the two knee levers, and as you can see, there are two of them. When you don't want to use them, you can fold them away in the organ just like that, but when you want to use them, you can pull them out, and they connect up to these little like metal poles here. You might not be able to see those, but there's one here, and the knee lever connects to that, and when you push on it, it moves a little metal pole kind of that way. So the one on the right is a forte knee lever, and the one on the left is a full organ knee lever. So basically what these do when you push the right one out is it applies the same thing that the forte stop does. If you pull the forte stop out, see how that one moves? It's because it's deactivating the mechanism from down here, and this doesn't do anything. If you apply the forte lever again, and if you push the stop in, then you will see that that lever moves because it's giving this access to the forte mechanism, and if you push it around when the forte stop is pushed in, it's opening and closing those forte things, because basically what happens when you pull the forte stop in or activate this is just opening up these baffles inside that allows more air to escape from the chamber where the reeds are, and it lets more sound out of the instrument. So let's say I'm just playing something here. I'm going to play first without the forte knee lever and then with it, just to show you guys how the sound changes. So that's without, and this is with. So that is what the forte knee lever does, and it allows you to get really cool expressive dynamics just kind of on the fly, and it's a lot easier than taking your hand off the key, pulling out the old sticky forte lever, and then putting your hand back on the keys to play the organ once again. So basically, it just allows you to have expressive dynamics whenever, wherever you want them, and it's kind of cool. It's sort of like having an expression pedal on a more modern organ, whether that's a pipe organ or a electronic organ like a Hammond. Those have expression pedals that allow you to control the volume, and this is kind of like an old primitive version of that you control with your knee. Now, as I said, the left pedal here is a full organ stop. I've seen it labeled like that on other organs. These ones are unlabeled. Perhaps it's because they were refinished and the previous guy wasn't able to find the old decals, or perhaps they never had decals on to begin with. But this is known as a full organ stop, and what happens is when you push this, it activates all of the stops on the organ except the forte one. That's only controlled by this or the forte stop. This one I don't think affects that. So basically what happens is every single stop on the organ, including the bass couplers, the treble couplers, the sub bass, everything that is working on the organ will play. I don't know if that would control the vox humana. If it worked, it probably wouldn't, because that's an effect that you wouldn't always want. But other than the forte and probably the vox humana, this left knee lever controls every single stop on the organ. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to play that same chord progression without either of these knee levers activated, and then I'm going to apply both of them and play it again, and you'll hear what a cool sound difference that makes. So that is the sound of these knee levers. That's what they do, and they're a really cool way to get expression and dynamics from a reed organ, because you'd think if these are folded away and you wouldn't see these and you sat down to one of these, you'd think that, oh gee, our only dynamics is adding in extra stops and applying the forte knob, all of which require me to take my hand off of the keys and pull these old levers. Well, you don't have to do that. You have these two knee levers, which allow you to do cool dynamics and expression on the fly, which I think is pretty cool. So here's a little bit of a close-up of one of the logos on the organ. This is on the left-hand side of the organ, and it says Moline here. On the camera screen, these keys look like they're brand new and they're nice and shiny, which is really cool to see. But in person, they have an aged yellow look, and they aren't perfect anymore, as much of the organ is. But this is the Moline badge on the left-hand side of the organ. On the right hand, it says organ. So when you're looking at it from far away, you can see Moline organ on the other side of the instrument. You can also see a couple of the stops. These, I think, are the original stickers on the stop, and you can see the kind of the old style font on there, bass coupler, and I think you can also see the diapason on there. So those are the stops, and if we take a little pan and a tour down the instrument, we can just kind of see all of those stops, and that's what they look like. You can also see a little badge on the middle of the organ that says Moline Organ Company, Moline, Illinois. So I believe this was made in the town of Moline, Illinois. Maybe someday I'll go visit. That might be kind of neat. I wonder if the buildings are still standing. I've heard that they are. And then on the right hand, you might be able to see the large organ logo on the other side, like I mentioned. So those are just the logos and the branding on the organ, just in case you are interested in that sort of thing. You can also see the stops a little bit better now. So hopefully you guys enjoyed seeing this video of the Moline Reed organ. It works. I made it sing, and I'm actually really, really happy with how well the the repair worked. But like I said, it's not as good as a complete restoration. Someday I probably will take it into a shop and have it completely restored and make it play as good as it once did back in 1892. But for now, I think it works just perfectly fine, and I think it is absolutely adequate for playing really cool Baroque music. And if you guys have any cool music suggestions for it, let me know. I'd really love to see what you guys want me to play on this organ, and request anything from Baroque music to really anything you want. If you have some strange song you want to know how it sounds in the reed organ, request it, and maybe I'll get around to doing that. And there's a lot of things on my schedule right now, but maybe one of your suggestions will make it into a video in the future, which might be kind of cool. So make sure to go ahead and do that, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure to go ahead and give it a like. If you want, you can go check out my channel. I've got lots of cool videos of reed organs I found out in the wild, as well as other organs like Hammond organs and digital pipe organs and harpsichords and pianos and more normal things like that. So if you want to go check all that out, you can. If you want to subscribe, thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.